So the next thing we need to do is we need to transfer this into a spreadsheet document so we can separate out all those different parts: the subject, the verb, the direct object, and the indirect object. So here I've opened up an Excel document with 4 basic columns: subject, verb, direct object, and indirect object. And what I'm going to do now is go through the entire document, and I'm going to input these into my spreadsheet. Now I could add an additional column here where I put in the original, and that can be really helpful if I want to go back and double check the context at any one point, but it's not crucial to what we're doing. So I am going to copy and paste it into this section, but I'm not going to worry about it too much in terms of looking at it constantly. So if I go over to my original and I highlight everything, because I've made them all individual lines, I can just copy, Control C, go over to A and paste, Control V, and each one will appear on its own line. And I can see, for example, here, as I fill in each section, it's going to cover up the original, and that's fine. That's all I need it to do. I will go through and delete all of these conjunctions and prepositional phrase markers, just so they're not cluttering up my document, but I can always go back and look at my original text when I need to. So, I got your note. So the subject is I, the verb is got, the direct object is note, and I think for this particular case, I'm going to put in that little bit of extra information, your note. And there is no indirect object. There's no person or thing that's an intermediary force in this sentence. So I'm just going to leave that one blank. Going to go ahead and delete the and. I intended to be sure to answer it. Now again, this I is added. It's something that I included. So I am going to go like this, I, and I'm just going to go up to the top of my document here so I can see it without having to constantly reopen this. Intended to be sure to answer it. So the verb is intended, and the direct object is to be sure to answer it. To be sure to answer it. Now, this isn't a direct object in the normal transitive verb sense, but it is the object of the intention. It is what the intention is. So we're going to put it there. That's grammatically where it fits in our analysis. Again, removing the but, I managed to miss the steamer. I is the subject. Again, it's implied, so we put it into the square brackets. Managed, and the direct object is another infinitive phrase, to miss the steamer. For which is an indicator of a clause. We'll get rid of that. I was sorry. Now this time the I is actually there, so I was sorry. And I'm going to go through the rest of these now and translate them all into individual sections. Again, this is me trying to fit my methodology to the text I have available. But when he says that when I said to Featherston and Fitzherbert, I got for reply it was reverse, basically what he's saying is that from Featherston and Fitzherbert is where this reply came from. And so I put that in the indirect object in the same way you would give a gift to somebody, you were receiving a reply from somebody. Again, it's not a perfect system. It's not necessarily accurate to call it the indirect object, but for the purpose of this particular analysis, that's where we're going to put it. Okay, so that didn't take too long. I went through and I put everything into subject, verb, and direct and indirect object as best I could. There's a lot of blank lines here and I want to get rid of those, so I'm going to go through and get rid of those really quickly. Now that we've separated our text into 4 columns, subject, verb, direct, and indirect object, we need to decide what kind of analysis we want to do. Now, if I put a bit more detail here in adverbs and adjectives, we could undertake something called sentiment analysis. And in fact, we're going to do that with this document in another video. But for today, I've only put in the very basic information because I really want to look at the grammar of the sentences. How was it constructed? So I'm going to look at a couple of different things in terms of grammar and syntax. The first is the type of verb. And I'm going to be looking at whether the verb is active or passive. What I mean by that is basically, is the subject actually having an action done to them? Are they the passive recipient of an action? Or are they actively doing it to somebody or something else? And then I want to have a look at whether or not an object or a direct object is a person or a thing. And the reason for this will become clear in a moment, but let's just look through a couple of these. So first, I'm going to create a new column here, and I'm going to call it Verb Voice. And the voice is going to be either active or passive. And then I'm going to create another column, which is direct object type, or dot. And that's basically going to say, is it an object or a person? And I'm going to do the same with the indirect object type, I dot. So if I make this just a little bit smaller so we can see it all on one page, I'm going to go through and look at every single sentence and try to find out these 3 things. So first, I got your note. Got is an active verb. I is actually doing that thing. He's gotting it. Now, please excuse the terrible way I've just said that, but you can see that it's not something that's happening to him, it's something that he is doing. Now, I realize to receive a letter is sort of a passive activity, but you're not trying to look at the semantics of the verb, you're looking at the syntax, and the voice of that verb is the active got. So the verb voice is active. The direct object is a note, it's a physical object. So we're going to say item, and there is no indirect object, so we're going to skip that. Now we look at the second sentence. I intended to be sure to answer it. Okay, so intended, again, that's an active verb. And is the second part, the direct object, a item or a person? Well, to be sure to answer it is an infinitive, a participle. So how do we turn that into an item or a person? Well, it's an abstract concept. So we're going to put that exactly like that, an abstract. And we can do this for any type of thought or concept, something that's not a physical item. I managed to miss the steamer. again, that's very active. He's actively managing it. And it is the idea of missing the steamer. So we'll go with abstract once again. Now we have I was sorry. Now, I was sorry is active. It's something that the I is actively doing. But how do we deal with sorry? Well, it is abstract again, but I think probably the most useful thing that we want to put here is relational. And relational really refers to the verb, but it gives us a sense that this is a definition. I am a sorry thing. I am a thing that is sorry. So it gives us a sense that it's not acting upon an abstract notion, but is actually just providing a definition or an equivalency. I was anxious to state. Okay, again, this is active. And it is relational. It's saying that I am a thing that is anxious to state something. So we're going to type in relational once again. And none of these have indirect objects, so we don't need to do anything here just yet. So let's go through a couple more of these and see if anything weird or unexpected pops up. Okay, so we found one right away. Charlie is a person. Now, letting Charlie come too soon is necessarily an abstract idea. It's the concept of permission being given for a thing. But Charlie is a person in that statement of permission. And I really think that it's important to indicate that that is concerning a person being acted upon. When we get to the 9th clause, we find a passive verb. And the way we know that is that the land is not actively doing something, it's having something done to it. Land can be purchased. Now, this is very, very important because it doesn't give us a sense of who the active party is. It's not that I am purchasing the land or he is purchasing the land or can purchase the land. It's just that the land can be purchased. So in terms of direct object, what type is it? We can assume that it's a person, but in the case of passive verbs, what we want to indicate is whether it is stated or unstated. And in this case, it is unstated. We do not know who is undertaking the action. Now, this one says we have some new blood, and that is a metaphorical statement of people, new blood, new people, people who are coming in with a different point of view, a different energy, but it's still a person. It's not a inanimate object, but in fact an animate one, a person or people. So that's how we're going to label it. Okay, now we've got our first indirect object, for answer. Now, again, this is not an indirect object, perhaps in the truest grammatical sense, but it gives us a sense of the other players within this sentence. So it is active, I got, and there is an abstract direct object, doubts. So where do we put in for answer? Well, again, it's not a person, it's not an item, it is an abstract concept, the idea of the reply or the answer. So that's what we're going to put in, abstract. Okay, so now we've got a couple of sentences that look like they're active tense, but in meaning, semantically, they are passive. So ministers are to have houses rent-free. Well, ministers are to have is an active, grammatically speaking, sentence. They are in the future going to have something, houses rent-free. But you can interpret it as somebody's going to give them a free house. But strictly speaking, it is talking about them doing something. They are having something. So we'll leave that one active. And they are getting an item of houses rent-free. The second sentence is a little bit different, even though it looks very similar. They are being purchased. Now you can tell this is a passive sentence by what I've put here in the direct object incorrectly, and it's actually part of the verb, are being purchased. That is a passive version of purchasing, or they purchase, they are being purchased. So this is a passive tense, and again, there is no sense of who is purchasing them. So we are going to say unstated. Now you can see there that I'm actually changing some of these as I go along. As I get a sense more and more for the way that Samuel Revens writes, I'm allowed to change my mind. Something I thought was a direct object now appears to me to be an adverb or something modifying the verb. And that's okay. You don't have to stick with your first impression. Again, it's important not to confuse past or past perfect with the passive voice. So the fact that Roebuck has recovered does not mean that something is causing him to recover. It just means that it happened at some time in the past and is now completed, the perfect tense. Okay, so now we've got quite a lot of information encoded about our document. And if we look at it, it's pretty clear the style in which Samuel Revens is writing. He almost always writes in the active tense. It's not something that he does very often to put things in the passive tense. However, when he does put things in the passive tense, he tends to leave them unstated. So if he says something has been purchased or something is taken, it's very rare that he'll actually say who is doing that. This gives a sense that he is referring to things rhetorically, abstract, or most importantly, in the case of this letter, something that is going to be understood by the other party implicitly. He doesn't always have to spell everything out to Henry Chapman because Chapman will understand who is doing the things he is referring to. The other thing that's really interesting about this is almost all of the document is referring to abstract ideas rather than people or objects. He does have people and objects throughout this document, but by far and away, most of his sentences relate to ideas, relational definitions, abstract concepts. It's very much a thinking letter expressing his thoughts rather than giving statements of narrative fact. This happened or that happened. In fact, most of the times he gives concrete transitive verbs, it relates to the letter writing process itself, that he had intended to write the letter, or he received your note, or his carte de visite was taken. These are about the actual giving and sending of letters as opposed to the content of the letter. Now, in terms of indirect objects, I only really have a few, and these are usually people. So this gives a sense that when he's talking about abstract ideas or he's talking about items, the people involved are being given as secondary information as opposed to the forefront of the sentence. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please consider hitting the like button below or subscribing to the channel. That'll let me know this is the type of video you want to see more of. And if you have any questions, comments, or just a suggestion for an upcoming video, please leave a comment below.